Hey guys, tonight we pick up right where we left off, in the cold, damp heart of the trenches. The war hasn't ended, the mud hasn't dried, and if you thought things were bad before, well, let's just say your socks still haven't dried from last time. This is the second half of our deep dive into World War I, through sleepy eyes and scientific whispers. More gas masks, more rats, and yes, more of that lovely trench perfume everyone raved about in 1917. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see, who else is drifting into sleep around the world with us? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in a muddy trench, as the faint morning light struggles through the fog. All around you, the soft clatter of equipment and the hushed coughs of men still half asleep bounce gently off the walls of your underground shelter. Above, the sky hangs heavy, gray, swollen, tired. You stretch your arms, bones aching from the cold, as another long day of waiting begins. This is the Western Front in 1917, and waiting has become its own kind of warfare. You're no longer counting bullets, you're counting seconds. The big push everyone whispered about weeks ago never came. Instead, it's more digging, more routine, more looking over your shoulder in case the rats get to your food first. The rats here are bold, some the size of house cats, and weirdly well fed. Scientists believe that their rapid breeding cycles, coupled with a surplus of corpses and food waste, made trench rats thrive far better than most humans in this zone. The trench is an ecosystem of its own. Lice are your loyal, annoying companions. They burrow into your clothes and scalp, making sure you never forget they're there. Soldiers call the itching trench fever, and science later confirms it's caused by a bacterium spread through body lice. It doesn't kill you, but it does make you feel like someone is slowly roasting your joints on a spit. Soldiers often burn their uniforms to kill the lice. Of course, that doesn't solve the problem, because 5 minutes later, another dozen hitch a ride on someone new. At mealtime, you get the same salty meat and hard biscuits that could probably survive a nuclear apocalypse. The biscuits are so hard you're pretty sure they could stop a bullet, and maybe they did once or twice. Still, you chew, because a full stomach means a stronger will to stay awake, and staying awake means staying alive. You write letters home, or try to. But what do you say? Still here, still cold, still waiting. You decorate the boredom with dry humor. The mud is now part of my soul. You scribble, half laughing, half choking on the irony. Scientists still argue whether humor helps soldiers cope or simply numb them. Maybe both. Maybe that's the only way you get through a war that feels more like a damp, endless camping trip from hell. And then comes the whistle. Not the usual kind. Not the one from a bird or a kettle. This is the whistle. It rises sharp above the low grumble of the trench. You grab your gear, heart doing tiny acrobatics in your chest. You scale the ladder, and just as your helmet crests the surface, you hear it, artillery, whining through the sky like a banshee on roller skates. You duck instinctively. Nothing hits, yet, but the ground shakes like it's laughing at your caution. Gas masks hang at your side like morbid accessories. Chlorine, phosgene, mustard gas, they each leave a signature. Chlorine burns your lungs and eyes. Mustard gas lingers, blistering skin and turning air into poison. The masks help, kind of, but sometimes the gas just sneaks around them, like a vengeful ghost. Some soldiers urinate on cloths and cover their mouths. The ammonia supposedly neutralizes chlorine. It's not perfect, but then again, nothing about trench life is. When you get downtime, and that's a generous word, you look at photos of home, of green fields not pocked with shell holes, of people smiling without 10 layers of grime on their faces. You hear songs, someone's humming something from back in France or maybe Germany, and for a brief second, you forget that you're part of a war. Did you know some trench networks had built-in chapels? Little shrines carved out with helmets hanging like makeshift chandeliers. Men prayed there, not because they were saints, but because war makes philosophers of even the rowdiest souls. The sun begins to set. It drips red over the rim of the trench, painting the mud in blood tones. You breathe in, hoping the air won't sting this time. It doesn't. For now, a scientist might tell you that the constant stress soldiers endured rewired their brains. Fight or flight became their baseline. A fringe theory even suggests some men began to prefer the trenches because peace felt too quiet, too soft. Scientists still argue whether that's trauma or adaptation. Either way, you lie back down in the dirt, helmet over your eyes. The whistle gone quiet for now. You wait again, because that's what trench life teaches you, to wait. And when you're not waiting, to listen. You pause beneath a camouflaged net draped across a narrow corridor, the fabric fluttering like a ragged curtain. The air smells faintly of damp earth and rusted iron. A nearby shell crater collects rainwater and mosquito eggs in equal measure, creating a weirdly reflective mirror where a bird stops to drink. Funny how even in places made for destruction, nature finds a way to redecorate. The Germans had begun building the Hindenburg Line, or Siegfriedstellung, if you want the official name, in late 1916. They knew the British and French were gaining momentum, and instead of letting the Allies crash against their exhausted front, they chose to retreat. But not in fear. No, they pulled back with the cold precision of someone rearranging chess pieces. When you reach the edge of the forward zone, you notice how every trench bends at odd angles. That's deliberate, so if a shell lands, its blast won't wipe out a whole line of soldiers. The science of carnage, neatly optimized. French theorists have floated the idea that the line's complexity helped prolong the war, not shorten it. There are whispers that secret tunnels beneath the line were used not just for troop movement, but for experiments. Yes, actual military experiments, testing sound waves, trench acoustics, even psychological endurance in darkness. It sounds like a horror film subplot, but then again, this entire war often feels like one long fever dream. Scientists still argue whether these underground networks were exaggerated post-war, or if they really did alter the pace of trench warfare. You continue drifting. Every few steps, you come across something oddly human. A French spoon left behind, a rusted button, a discarded pair of socks tied neatly together. Someone once stood exactly where you are, maybe whispering a joke or a prayer, maybe both. You can almost hear the shuffle of cards, under a tarp during downtime, the low murmur of gossip passed down the trench walls. You picture a soldier tapping out Morse code beneath a blanket, sending the words, still breathing, to a girl somewhere far from the mud and madness. You reach a machine gun nest built into a concrete shelter called a pillbox. Yes, like the mints, except these spit bullets instead of fresh breath. They're squat, round, and terrifying. The Germans reinforced these with steel rods and angled walls to deflect artillery. Their calculations were based on principles of kinetic absorption, a very sciencey way of saying, let's make this thing harder to blow up. Even today, remnants of these pillboxes survive, covered in moss, staring blankly at empty fields. And here's a strange little twist of fate. Many of these bunkers were built by forced labor from occupied territories, Belgians, Poles, and Russians. That detail often slips through the cracks in history books, but it lingers in the stone and steel. The very walls you're brushing your fingers against hold the fingerprints of exhausted men who never chose to be part of this conflict. You can almost feel their breath lingering in the mortar. The Hindenburg Line wasn't invincible forever. Eventually, the Allies broke through it in 1918 in a series of aggressive and costly offensives. But until then, it was a monstrous monument to engineering and obsession. Some of the trenches were 2 stories deep with drainage systems, kitchens, even electric lights powered by generators. At this point, you're practically describing a very sad, muddy airman. You pass by what used to be a field hospital. The roof has long since collapsed, but the air still smells faintly of old antiseptic and damp linen. A ledger lies cracked open on a shelf, some names crossed out, others underlined. It's both chilling and strangely intimate. Here, lives flickered in and out like matches in the rain. Now you're approaching the rearward zone. This is where the officers stayed, sometimes sipping ersatz coffee made from roasted acorns. Scientific fact, roasting acorns neutralizes their bitterness, making them slightly more palatable, but no amount of alchemy could make them taste like Starbucks. Still, it was a psychological boost, and in war, placebo sometimes works better than truth. Beneath your feet, the ground quivers faintly, maybe an old memory or just the wind rolling across buried munitions. You take a deep breath. The war is moving again, creeping toward its final chapters. But for now, You're in a place caught between engineering brilliance and human tragedy. The Hindenburg Line, silent tonight, once roared like thunder. You pass by what used to be a field hospital. The roof has long since collapsed, but the air still smells faintly of old antiseptic and damp linen. A ledger lies cracked open on a shelf, some names crossed out, others underlined. It's both chilling and strangely intimate. Here, lives flickered in and out like matches in the rain. Now you're approaching the rearward zone. This is where the officers stayed, sometimes sipping ersatz coffee made from roasted acorns. Scientific fact, roasting acorns neutralizes their bitterness, making them slightly more palatable, but no amount of alchemy could make them taste like Starbucks. Still, it was a psychological boost, and in war, placebo sometimes works better than truth. Beneath your feet, the ground quivers faintly, maybe an old memory or just the wind rolling across buried munitions. You take a deep breath. The war is moving again, creeping toward its final chapters. But for now, you're in a place caught between engineering brilliance and human tragedy. The Hindenburg Line, silent tonight, once roared like thunder. You pass a sign half buried in dirt. The German words have faded, but someone scratched into the wood in English, "We were here." It's a fitting echo, a final wink from history as the trenches begin to dissolve into shadow. And you keep walking, quietly, slowly, because the war doesn't stop. But for this moment, it softens just enough to let you breathe. The horizon is drowsy now, glazed in the soft gold of a dying sun, and the war you're walking through seems to stretch and yawn like it, too, is ready to collapse. But you don't get to rest just yet. You're now threading your way through a pocket of France that became infamous in 1917 for two things: epic failure and total mutiny. Welcome to the Nivelle Offensive, also known as that time France tried to end the war in 48 hours and ended up sparking a nationwide breakdown. You step onto chalky soil near the Chemin des Dames Ridge, where General Robert Nivelle convinced everyone that a grand frontal assault would break German lines within 48 hours. Bold claim. Scientific optimism, maybe, but probably more like blind confidence dressed in a uniform. The plan was a massive artillery barrage followed by a rapid infantry wave, cutting through German defenses like a knife through a baguette. But the enemy, they had bunkers, deep ones, carved right into limestone hills, like stone termites. The Germans had tunneled entire fortresses underneath, immune to shells. You crouch near the mouth of one of these old bunkers. It's wide enough to park a carriage and deep enough to echo your breath. Inside, it's as dark as the humor soldiers clung to during the offensive. A candle stub still sits in a wall crevice, melted down to a sad puddle of wax. Someone had hoped it'd last longer than the attack did. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some of those underground hideouts had built-in pipe organs, played by German troops in downtime. Can you imagine? One moment, artillery is pounding the surface, and beneath it all, Bach. The French soldiers, they weren't so lucky. They charged uphill into machine guns, pouring over trenches in what looked like desperation ballet. The result was catastrophic. Nearly 200,000 casualties in just a few weeks. One soldier wrote in his journal, "We marched through blood thick as soup." Scientists still argue whether it was poor strategy, overconfidence, or simply the weather that doomed the operation. Rain turned everything to glue. Weapons jammed. Maps smeared. The only thing that moved with ease was fear. That fear turned to fury. And here's where it gets spicy. About 40,000 French soldiers refused to fight afterward. Yes, full-on mutiny. They didn't burn flags or start a revolution. No, they just sat down, refused orders, sang songs, demanded leave, decent food, and, shockingly, basic human treatment. Some units put white flowers in their rifle barrels. One platoon marched the wrong way entirely, shouting, "We're not meat." You step over what used to be a mess hall, now swallowed by ivy and soil. Somewhere beneath the weeds lies a fork stamped with RF for Republique France, probably stolen, probably fought over. You remember hearing about how prized decent cutlery was in the trenches. Funny what people cling to when the world's falling apart. Eventually, the French High Command had to do something. Soldiers couldn't exactly yelp their dissatisfaction, so a few ringleaders were court-martialed, some executed, though fewer than myths suggest. Most were quietly reassigned. And Nivelle, he got the boot, replaced by General Philippe Pétain, who wisely realized that screaming orders at exhausted humans wasn't strategy, it was just noise. Putin gave the troops longer rest, better food, and, yes, actual leave. The front stabilized. Morale crept back like warmth under a heavy blanket. And the mutiny. It's often painted as shameful, but in hindsight, it was a rare act of collective sanity, a mass nap protest in the face of madness. As you walk, a night breeze kicks up chalk dust, and it stings your nose in that oddly satisfying way, like when you open an old book, and it smells like secrets. You pass an old dugout with slogans etched inside, "More to la guerre," "Death to war," and, less poetically, "Send wine." And here's your science fact for the night. During the offensive, pigeons were still one of the fastest ways to relay messages. A famous bird named La Valente carried word of a trapped unit, under fire, and became a minor national hero. Pigeon communication, a reminder that sometimes feathery determination beats all the brass in the world. You rest for a moment beside the ruins of a horse stable, now overtaken by nettles and blue wildflowers. The horses are long gone, of course, but you can still hear the echo of hooves and harnesses, the creak of carts dragged through sludge. Mules, actually, did most of the dirty work. Stronger and grumpier than horses, they were the real MVPs of supply lines. Your foot grazes a rusted helmet, one of the iconic Adrian models, painted horizon blue. Its rim is dented, possibly by shrapnel or just time. You wonder what the soldier who wore it was thinking the day everything broke down. Did he mutter curses, whisper songs, pray to ghosts? The war is reshaping itself again. New leadership, new tactics, new hope. But something fundamental cracked during the Nivelle offensive. A belief, maybe even a myth, that industrialized armies could win by sheer will. That logic died on the Chemin des Dames. And as you look up at the stars, sprinkled like salt across black velvet, it occurs to you that even the sky watched quietly as men marched into madness for 48 promised hours and never really came back. The bitter taste of mud and smoke lingers in the air as you trudge forward, your boots sinking into the churned-up earth like it's swallowing time itself. You're moving away from the haunting silence of the Nivelle offensive and into the throes of 1918, the final year of this nightmare ballet that's been grinding continents and souls alike. This is the year when the war decided it would no longer linger. It would sprint to its bitter end. And the stage for this final act, the Western Front, still scarred, still soaked in sorrow, yet suddenly pulsing with a desperate urgency. You find yourself near Amiens, a town that became the heart of what the Allies called the 100 Days Offensive. It's a patchwork of shattered buildings and hopeful eyes. Soldiers from France, Britain, Canada, Australia, and yes, the fresh-faced Americans, are all jumbled together like a restless crowd at a never-ending party that no one wants to attend but nobody can leave. You might hear laughter mingled with tension here, a surreal cocktail. Here's a curious fact. During this offensive, the Allies used tanks more effectively than ever before. But did you know some crews trained their metal beasts to navigate mud so deep? The machines seemed to be swimming rather than rolling. Science says the tank's caterpillar tracks spread their weight enough to avoid sinking. But engineers still battled nature's grip, trying to perfect this early all-terrain vehicle. Those first tanks were noisy, stinky, and prone to breaking down, but they became a terrifying symbol of industrial warfare's relentless push forward. As you move closer to the front lines, you notice a strange pattern in the landscape. There are patches where the grass refuses to grow, where shells exploded in violent bouquets of dirt and debris. But then, in the cracks between, tiny flowers poke up, forget-me-nots, dandelions, stubborn little soldiers of nature that laugh quietly at destruction. Scientists still argue whether these wildflowers' survival is a sign of nature's resilience, or just an accident of soil chemistry. Either way, they're a gentle reminder that life insists on continuing, even in the harshest of places. Your boots crush a patch of these fragile blooms as you pass by a ramshackle dugout, where a Canadian sniper once kept a journal. The pages are lost to time, but the soldiers talked about him as a ghost, silent, unseen, deadly accurate. Snipers were the weird outlaws of trench warfare, their skill a mix of cold science, nerves, and a touch of madness. Some soldiers claimed these sharpshooters could hear a twig snap a mile away, though that's probably exaggeration. or at least wishful thinking from those nervously poking their heads over the trench edge. Amid the chaos of shellfire and shouted orders, you might chuckle at the fact that some troops developed their own unique slang. British soldiers called German artillery whiz-bangs because of the sound shells made zipping overhead, like a sinister jazz riff. And then there's the American doughboys, fresh and eager, calling everything the real McCoy, probably just to sound cooler among seasoned veterans. Language, you see, was just another weapon, a way to claim sanity in the insanity. The 100 Days Offensive was a masterclass in combined arms tactics, infantry, artillery, tanks, and aircraft all choreographed to move like a giant mechanical beast. For example, planes dropped messages, spied on enemy positions, and sometimes even strafed trenches with machine guns. It was an early form of air power that still had plenty of bugs to work out, like pilots fumbling with parachutes or getting lost mid-flight. The war was teaching humanity how to fight from the sky, but at a cost that still makes you blink in disbelief. In one small village you pass through, there's a sign nailed to a shattered door reading, "Welcome to the Somme." You've heard of the Somme. It's a name heavy enough to sink ships. A battle that began in 1916, but whose scars lingered like ghosts, reminding everyone that even after 2 years, some wounds refuse to heal. Scientists still argue whether the Somme was a pointless bloodbath or a grim necessity that wore down the German army. It's a question without a clear answer, much like the war itself. Near the outskirts, a group of soldiers gathers around a makeshift stove, swapping stories over thin soup. One of them pulls out a harmonica, and a soft tune drifts through the cold air. Music was a rare balm, a brief human connection amid mechanized death. You imagine the song echoing between the trees, a fragile thread tying together strangers who probably won't see tomorrow. Your eyes catch a glimpse of a small, makeshift graveyard, simple wooden crosses leaning in the wind. It's quiet here, peaceful, except for the occasional whisper of the wind through the barbed wire. You kneel and brush a hand over a cross marked, "Unknown Soldier." For every name and number, there are countless more who vanished into the fog of war, lost to memory and history. And yet, here they rest, silent witnesses to the cost of human ambition. As you stand, the sun dips low, bathing the battlefield in soft amber light. You can almost hear the war itself exhaling, exhausted but not yet defeated. The final chapters are being written now, with every step forward soaked in hope, fear, and an aching desire for peace. You sense that change is coming, slow, uneven, but inevitable. And here's your quirky fact for tonight. During these final pushes, some soldiers used carrier pigeons with tiny cameras, strapped to their backs to spy on enemy lines. Early aerial reconnaissance, but feather-powered. Science says these birds could fly up to 60 miles per hour, navigating by Earth's magnetic field, a skill that still fascinates researchers today. You walk on, the ground softening beneath your feet as you, near the edge of the front. The sounds of battle fade into a gentle hush, broken only by distant birdsong and the rustling of leaves. Somewhere nearby, a soldier hums a lullaby, a whispered promise that this nightmare will end, that dawn will come. You keep moving forward, the quiet after the storm pressing in around you, like a thick blanket. The last battles of the war are unfolding with a strange mixture of desperation and determination, like a finale where everyone's holding their breath. The war is nearly over, but the scars it has left are still raw beneath the surface. You can almost feel the weight of history bearing down on your shoulders, as if the ground itself remembers every footstep, every shout, every whispered prayer. The German forces are retreating, worn down by relentless pressure and dwindling supplies. You might be surprised to learn that this retreat was one of the fastest and most chaotic in modern military history. Trains overloaded with troops trundle down tracks humming with panic, while others flee on foot through muddy fields and shattered villages. The pace of this collapse was so sudden that some commanders barely had time to issue orders. Scientists still argue whether it was strategic genius or sheer exhaustion that broke the stalemate, probably a messy mix of both. Amidst this turmoil, you stumble across a curious sight, a group of German soldiers releasing thousands of lanterns into the twilight sky. This was a common practice called light release, meant to signal retreat or confuse enemy aircraft. The glowing orbs float like fireflies, flickering against the darkening sky. The science behind these lanterns is simple: Hot air lifts the paper vessels, but the effect is eerily poetic. It's as if these soldiers are sending tiny messages of hope or farewell, a fleeting beauty in the midst of destruction. Nearby, the famous Meuse-Argonne offensive rages on. This massive Allied push is one of the bloodiest campaigns of the entire war, involving over 1 million American troops. You might chuckle at the nickname, Doughboys, that stuck to these fresh-faced Americans, though no one seems quite sure where it originated. Some say it's because of their rounded uniform buttons. Others argue it's a carryover from earlier cavalry slang. Whatever the truth, these soldiers are learning fast that war is nothing like the training grounds. As you trudge through the broken forest and shell-pocked earth, you spot a tree scarred with bullet holes and shrapnel marks. It's called the Lone Sentinel by some soldiers, a silent witness that somehow survived the barrage. Scientists still debate whether trees like this can actually heal themselves over time or if they simply adapt and endure damage in unique ways. Regardless, this battered giant stands as a symbol of resilience amidst chaos. You pause to watch a squad of medics at work, rushing between the trenches carrying stretchers with wounded men. Their job is brutal, often thankless, and incredibly dangerous. Interestingly, many medics carried special whistles to call for help or warn of incoming shellfire, an early form of battlefield communication. It's a stark reminder of how science and innovation were deeply woven into the grim daily realities of war. Nearby, soldiers exchange stories over coffee brewed from whatever they can find. Humor, it seems, was one of the few weapons that didn't run out. One tale you overhear involves a German soldier who tried to escape capture by disguising himself as a chicken. Yes, a chicken. Whether true or exaggerated, it's a bizarre anecdote that brings a brief smile amid the shadows. You make a mental note to never underestimate the power of absurdity in tough times. As the sun dips below the horizon, the sounds of battle fade into a distant rumble. You feel the subtle shift in the air, a mixture of relief and lingering dread. The war is nearing its final bow, but peace still seems a fragile dream. You think about the millions who have marched, fought, and fallen on this soil. Their stories, like the glowing lanterns, will drift into memory, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, but never forgotten. And here's your fringe tidbit for tonight. Some soldiers believe that certain animals, like cats or dogs, could sense impending shellfire or gas attacks. While science hasn't fully explained this behavior, anecdotal evidence from the trenches suggests that animals often behaved oddly before explosions. Maybe they picked up vibrations humans couldn't, or maybe it was just war's strange way of making everything feel just a bit more uncertain. You take a deep breath, smelling the faint scent of smoke, mixed with earth and something almost floral, perhaps those stubborn wildflowers from before. It's a reminder that even here, life persists, quietly weaving through the threads of destruction. With your boots heavy but your spirit quietly steady, you move onward, stepping lightly into the fading light, carrying the weight of a world at war, but also the hope for what comes after. You press on, the horizon stretching wide with a mix of smoke and dawn's pale light. The final chapter of the war is closing in fast, like the last pages of a gripping book. You almost don't want to finish. The mood is strange, part exhaustion, part tense anticipation, as armies prepare for one last, massive push. It's a bit like waiting for a thunderstorm to break, knowing it will come, but unsure exactly when, or how hard. The Allied forces have begun what historians now call the 100 Days Offensive, a relentless series of attacks, aimed at breaking the German lines for good. You walk alongside weary soldiers moving through a landscape that looks more like a moonscape than Earth, craters, mud, twisted metal, and the occasional ghostly remnants of once sturdy buildings. The air smells of wet earth and something metallic, a constant reminder of the machinery that reshaped this battlefield. Science offers a fascinating tidbit here. The introduction of tanks in these final battles revolutionized ground warfare. These lumbering beasts, covered in steel plates and churning through mud, brought a new dimension to the fight. You probably wouldn't want to be inside one, though. Temperatures inside could soar above 50 degrees Celsius, and ventilation was practically non-existent. Soldiers joked that riding in a tank was like sitting in a sauna while being shot at. Scientists still argue whether tanks were decisive in ending the war, or more of a psychological weapon. As you move through the trenches, you notice how communication technology had evolved. with field telephones and runners keeping lines open despite constant shelling. But sometimes, messages got hilariously garbled. A famous case involved a commander receiving an order to attack at dawn, which got misheard as attach a fawn. No one sent out a deer, but you can imagine the confusion that caused. These little errors remind you that even amid chaos, human error and humor persist. You come across a field hospital tent, where nurses work tirelessly to patch up the wounded. The scene is almost surreal. Beds lined with men from different countries, languages mixing in the air like an uneasy melody. The nurses' hands move with practiced precision, yet there's a softness to their care that cuts through the harshness of war. You learn that many women, who served as nurses during WWA, helped pioneer modern emergency medicine, developing triage systems still in use today. Near the hospital, a group of soldiers gather around a makeshift radio, listening to music broadcasted from home. The melodies of jazz and folk songs feel oddly out of place but somehow comforting. Music, it seems, was one of the few things that could momentarily transport soldiers away from the mud and blood. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some soldiers even formed small bands using scavenged instruments. Imagine a trumpet made from a shell casing, or drums from empty cans. Scientists still argue how much music truly affected morale, but its power to connect hearts in dark times is undeniable. You pause to watch a platoon preparing for a charge. Their faces are set with grim determination, but you notice the occasional nervous grin or shared joke. Humor, you realize again, is like a secret weapon soldiers carry deep inside. One story tells of a soldier who hid a rubber chicken in his pack, claiming it was his lucky charm. It probably didn't stop bullets, but it certainly kept spirits up. The sun climbs higher now, and you feel the shift in the air as the battle roars back to life. Shells explode in the distance, earth trembles underfoot, and the rhythm of war marches relentlessly forward. The ground you tread holds echoes of countless stories, of courage, fear, friendship, and loss. You breathe deeply, tasting the cool morning air, and think about how science today uses battlefield data from WWI to understand trauma and PTSD better. The war wasn't just fought on fields but also in minds, a struggle whose effects rippled for decades. As you step forward, the quiet promise of an ending feels almost within reach, but you know the journey is far from over. War has a way of bending time, making moments stretch and contract unpredictably. And you, walking through this chapter of history, are caught in that strange flow. You trudge through a landscape forever marked by the scars of war, trenches carved deep into the earth, shell craters like moon pockmarks, and shattered trees standing like skeletons against the gray sky. It's strange how nature stubbornly pushes back, with grass and wildflowers creeping through the debris, a quiet reminder that life keeps nudging forward even in the darkest places. This resilience feels almost hopeful, like a whispered promise amid the chaos. The final Allied offensives continue to ripple across the Western Front. You watch soldiers coordinating artillery barrages and infantry advances with a precision born of bitter experience. The mechanization of war, fully realized now, fills the air with the constant clatter of machine guns, the drone of planes overhead, and the low rumble of tanks. It's a brutal symphony, relentless and unforgiving. Here's a scientific nugget. The chemical warfare introduced earlier in the war still haunts these fields. Mustard gas, that invisible, creeping menace, causes blistering burns and blindness. The soldiers' gas masks, though lifesavers, are uncomfortable and imperfect, sometimes fogging up at the worst moments. Scientists still argue about the ethics and long-term effects of chemical weapons, but the devastation they wrought is undeniable. You spot an unusual sight, a carrier pigeon, wings glistening, tethered and ready to deliver a message. These feathered couriers were crucial when wires snapped or radios failed. It's almost poetic how these birds risked everything, flying through storms and gunfire to keep vital communication alive. A quirky fact: some pigeons were awarded medals for their bravery. Talk about a feather in one's cap. Nearby, you overhear soldiers debating the war's end, hopeful whispers tangled with exhaustion. The debate among historians about the war's true cause bubbles up in your mind. Was it the tangled alliances, nationalism, or simply the spark of a Sarajevo assassination? Scientists still argue about which factor was most decisive, but you realize it's probably a mix, like a complex recipe. no one wanted to taste. You pass a field kitchen, the smell of stewed meat and hardtack briefly breaking the monotony of mud and metal. Food was a rare comfort, and soldiers prized their rations as treasure. Sometimes, they'd trade small items, a chocolate bar here, a piece of chewing gum there, creating a small economy amid the madness. You smile thinking about how even in war, human nature sneaks in, always finding ways to barter and bond. A group of soldiers share a quiet moment, writing letters home. Their handwriting is shaky, the words sometimes halting, but the emotion is clear. Letters were lifelines, carrying love and hope across the miles. You think about how today's instant messages have replaced these paper lifelines, but maybe they lack some of the weight that comes with pen and paper. You spot a battlefield artist sketching scenes with quick, sure strokes. These unofficial war artists captured moments that photos couldn't, moments of quiet, of fear, and fleeting beauty. Their works now offer a window into the human side of conflict, a reminder that even amid destruction, art persists. As the day stretches on, the distant thunder of artillery never ceases. The smell of wet earth, sweat, and burnt cordite hangs heavy, mingling with the softer scent of pine and wild flowers daring to grow. It's a strange blend of destruction and renewal, much like the war itself. You realize that while the war rages, history is being shaped, not just by generals and politicians but by every soldier, nurse, pigeon, and artist caught in this vast, grinding machine. And you, wandering through these scenes, carry their stories forward. You move slowly through the shadow of what was once a thriving town, now reduced to rubble and ghostly silence. The echoes of laughter and daily life seem almost cruel in contrast to the present desolation. As you step carefully over broken bricks and twisted metal, you notice the faint outlines of homes, schools, and markets, all swallowed by the relentless advance of war. The earth here feels tired, as if it has absorbed too much suffering to ever fully heal. The soldiers around you carry the weight of months, sometimes years, of fighting etched into their faces. Their eyes betray exhaustion and a quiet desperation, but also an unspoken resolve. You catch glimpses of camaraderie, brief moments of humor exchanged over shared cigarettes, or the struggle to find a patch of dry ground. It's these small human touches that keep the relentless machine of war from completely consuming the spirit. One scientific fact drifts through your thoughts: the impact of prolonged stress on the human body. Soldiers' cortisol levels spike continuously, leading to fatigue and sometimes shell shock, which we now recognize as PTSD. Scientists still argue about the best ways to treat these invisible wounds, but their effects are undeniable and long-lasting. Nearby, a soldier pulls out a harmonica, its worn surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. The melancholy tune rises softly, a fragile moment of peace amid chaos. You recall reading that music was often used therapeutically during the war to boost morale and ease anxiety, a quirky but comforting detail in a world turned upside down. You overhear a debate among the troops about what the future holds. Some cling to hope for peace, while others brace for an uncertain aftermath. The question of how the war will reshape borders, politics, and society is hotly contested not only on the battlefield but in scholarly circles too. Scientists still argue whether the Treaty of Versailles would sow the seeds of lasting peace or future conflict. Passing a makeshift medical tent, you catch the smell of antiseptic mingling with earth and sweat. Medics work tirelessly, stitching wounds and comforting the wounded with steady hands and kind words. Medical advances like antiseptics and blood transfusions are saving lives, yet infections still claim many. It's a stark reminder that even in the early 20th century, science was racing to catch up with the brutal reality of modern warfare. As dusk falls, you find yourself surrounded by the quiet chorus of crickets and distant artillery. The night promises no real rest, but for a moment, the world seems to hold its breath. You lean back, eyes tracing the darkening sky, and realize that every whisper of wind, every flicker of starlight, carries the weight of untold stories, stories of courage, loss, and the stubborn hope for a dawn after darkness. You trudge through the muddy trenches once more, the cold seeping into your bones like an uninvited guest. The mud clings to your boots, thick and unyielding, and the air smells of damp earth mixed with something sharper: smoke, gunpowder, and sweat. Around you, the groan of distant artillery forms a low, persistent soundtrack, while overhead, Clouds drift sluggishly across a sky heavy with the threat of rain. It's the kind of setting that would inspire a gloomy painting, if anyone had the luxury to think about art here. A scientific fact drifts into your mind. The trench warfare of World War I was unique in its brutal static nature, a deadly stalemate that stretched for miles. The trenches themselves created a micro-ecosystem. Rats, lice, and disease flourished in the dank conditions, making survival a matter not just of avoiding bullets but bacteria. Scientists still argue whether the trench design was the best possible strategy, or a disastrous mistake that prolonged suffering needlessly. You spot a rat scuttling across a puddle, its beady eyes reflecting the pale light. These creatures became infamous during the war, growing to enormous sizes, feeding on the dead, and spreading typhus. Soldiers joked about their rats, the size of cats, but the reality was grim. Still, some found dark humor in naming these pests, a tiny rebellion against the endless misery. A sergeant nearby pulls out a pocket watch, checking the time with meticulous care. Time itself seemed warped in the trenches. Minutes stretched into hours with nothing to do but wait, while seconds could explode into chaos in a barrage or raid. This paradox plays tricks on your mind, a blend of boredom and adrenaline that soldiers had to master to keep going. You overhear whispers about the new technology creeping into the war: tanks, flamethrowers, and airplanes. These innovations promised to break the deadlock, but brought new horrors in their wake. Scholars still debate whether technological advancement accelerated the scale of death or ultimately saved lives by shortening battles. As night falls, the temperature drops further, and you pull your coat tighter. The camaraderie you glimpsed earlier becomes more vital than ever. Around a flickering lantern, a group shares stories and dry biscuits, their laughter fragile but genuine. Moments like this, brief and flickering, become a kind of light in the dark, proof that even amid mechanized slaughter, humanity clings to hope. You close your eyes for a moment, hearing the soft murmur of voices and the distant rumble of artillery fade into a lullaby of rain on tin and mud. Somewhere, a soldier hums a tune you recognize, a melody that feels both haunting and strangely comforting. The night stretches on, endless and unknowable, but for now, it holds you gently, like a tired sigh. You wake to the chill before dawn, the trenches wrapped in a heavy fog that blurs shapes into ghostly outlines. The air feels thick and still, as if the world is holding its breath before the inevitable chaos. Round you, soldiers move quietly, their faces pale and drawn, but alert, their breath visible in the cold morning air. The smell of wet wool and damp earth saturates everything, grounding you in this harsh and forgiving reality. Scientific fact drifts to your awareness. The widespread use of poison gas in World War I introduced a new, terrifying element to warfare. Chlorine and mustard gas could linger in the trenches, invisible and deadly, a silent killer that soldiers had to detect by smell or sight. Despite advances in gas masks, many suffered painful, lingering injuries, and scientists still argue whether chemical weapons crossed an ethical line that changed war forever. You catch a strange glint as the first light hits shattered glass, and barbed wire tangled like a nightmare sculpture. The no man's land between trenches is a graveyard of broken dreams and twisted metal, a place where courage and terror dance together. It's said some soldiers tried to collect souvenirs, shards of shell casing, fragments of enemy helmets, as grim trophies of survival. A sergeant pulls you aside, voice low but urgent, briefing you on the day's plans. Artillery will soften the enemy lines before an infantry assault attempts to push forward. The soldiers' faces tighten with the knowledge that many will not return. The open scholarly debate about these offensives questions whether the staggering human cost ever justified the few meters gained, or if commanders simply repeated the same deadly mistakes. As the first shells begin to fall, you brace yourself against the shaking earth. The cacophony of explosions, shouts, and machine gun fire swells around you, an overwhelming storm of noise and fear. Yet beneath it all, you notice an odd detail, the strangely rhythmic pattern of the artillery, almost like a brutal, pounding heartbeat. It's a harsh reminder that science and strategy pulse through even the most chaotic moments of war. Through the haze, you glimpse the faces of fellow soldiers, some steely with resolve, others wide-eyed with raw terror. Amid this whirlwind, brief acts of kindness emerge, a shared cigarette, a whispered word of encouragement, a hand steadied on a trembling shoulder. These small human connections become a lifeline amid the violence. As the barrage dies down and the order to advance echoes, you feel the weight of every step, the crunch of mud beneath boots, the sharp tang of fear mixing with adrenaline. The day stretches ahead, uncertain and perilous, but you move forward, part of a relentless tide in a war that reshapes the world. The aftermath of battle leaves you trudging through a surreal landscape, a morass of mud, shattered wood, and twisted metal that clings to your boots like a second skin. The once vivid cries of combat now fade into an eerie silence, interrupted only by distant moans or the occasional sharp bark of a war dog. Around you, the trenches lie scarred and crumbling, reminders of brutal days past, each dugout a testament to the endurance of those who endured. One curious scientific fact settles in your mind: trench foot, a debilitating condition caused by prolonged exposure to damp, unsanitary conditions, plagued thousands of soldiers. Your feet ache in protest against the relentless cold and moisture, and you understand why maintaining dry feet was a constant battle. Interestingly, some soldiers resorted to applying whale oil as a crude but effective preventative measure. Scientists still argue whether trench foot was due mainly to poor hygiene, or simply the unavoidable nature of trench life. The eerie quiet contrasts sharply with the oddities you notice, like the presence of glowworms flickering in the dark corners of abandoned dugouts, or the occasional rat brazen enough to scurry past your boots, unfazed by the human misery around them. These creatures thrived in the trenches, some growing fat on scraps, while others spread disease. There's a fringe theory that rats may have even played a role in soldiers' dreams, symbolizing decay and the ever-present threat of death in the trenches. Scholars continue debating the psychological impact of these conditions, questioning whether the persistent dampness and filth contributed more to soldiers' mental collapse than the horrors of combat itself. You feel the weight of this possibility as you pull your coat tighter, the dampness seeping into your bones and dragging your spirits down. Yet, amid the grimness, there's an unexpected beauty. The way the morning mist clings to shattered wire, sparkling like frozen tears in the weak sunlight, or how the distant call of a lone bird pierces the fog with fragile hope. These small moments seem almost defiant against the surrounding desolation. You catch yourself chuckling softly, imagining how trench rats might organize their own secret societies beneath the battlefield. Maybe they hold little rat councils, debating the best routes to scavenge or which soldiers are too slow to catch. It's a dark humor, but humor nonetheless, a tiny light flickering in an otherwise bleak world. As you pull your boots free from a sticky patch of mud, you realize that survival here is less about heroics and more about enduring the unbearable. Each small act of care or caution a thread holding you together in this fragile tapestry of war. You rise from the damp earth and press forward, feeling the crunch of shattered wood and wire underfoot, the air thick with the fog of dust, smoke, and the faint metallic tang of rusted shells. The no man's land stretches ahead, a bleak, barren expanse, where once vibrant fields and villages stood, now erased by relentless artillery bombardment. You trudge carefully, mindful of hidden craters, and the occasional glint of unexploded ordnance, a silent threat lurking beneath the mud. Here's a scientific fact to calm your mind. The intense bombardments generated shock waves that literally shook the earth beneath you, sometimes causing tremors felt miles away. These shock waves disrupted the soil, creating a landscape so unstable that even walking could feel like stepping on a jelly. You imagine how the earth itself must have groaned under such relentless punishment. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. During lulls in fighting, soldiers often spotted peculiar phenomena called quakes, mysterious booms, that seemed to come from the atmosphere, baffling both soldiers and scientists of the day. Some thought they were secret new weapons. Others joked that the sky itself was angry. Today, scientists still debate whether these were caused by atmospheric conditions or distant artillery echoes. But at the time, these sounds added a surreal layer to the chaos. You notice the strange silence in no man's land, broken only by the occasional flapping of torn banners caught in the wind. It's easy to forget that this scarred ground once bore the weight of everyday life, farmers tending crops, children playing beneath open skies. Now, it's a ghostly reminder of what was lost. Despite the devastation, small signs of life persist. Tiny wildflowers, poppies mostly, poke through the cracked earth, their bright red petals stark against the gray mud. You recall that these poppies would later become symbols of remembrance, a poignant reminder of resilience amid destruction. As you move cautiously, you step over a discarded helmet, its faded insignia a silent story of a soldier who once called this place home. There's a shadow of melancholy that settles over you, mixed with an odd fascination. How nature and memory intertwine here in the ruins of war. Amid the grit and sorrow, you manage a quiet joke to yourself. Maybe the earth is just trying to shake off the grime of human conflict, like a dog shedding water after a bath. It's a small comfort, a brief escape from the heaviness pressing down on your shoulders. You keep walking, each step a testament to endurance in a landscape that refuses to heal, yet somehow still breathes. You press onward through the shattered remnants of trenches, where the stench of damp earth mixes with the faint, sour odor of decayed wood and rusted metal. The trenches, once bustling arteries of survival and strategy, now lie eerily quiet, their sides crumbling, the wooden supports slick with mold. You can almost hear the ghosts of whispered plans and muffled cries, the muffled rhythm of boots and whispered commands, echoing faintly in your mind like a half-remembered dream. Here's a scientific fact to steady your thoughts. The trenches acted as a crude form of insulation, protecting soldiers from the bitter cold that could plunge well below freezing during winter months. The compacted earth walls absorbed some of the temperature swings, creating microclimates that sometimes allowed for tiny fungi and mosses to grow, odd little pockets of life amid the ruin. Now, for a quirky tidbit, in some sectors, soldiers kept small pets, mostly cats and dogs, to chase away rats and lift morale. These unofficial mascots became beloved companions, with some soldiers claiming their pets had uncanny sixth senses for danger. Scientists still argue whether these claims were just hopeful superstition, or if animals truly picked up on subtle cues invisible to human senses. The labyrinthine trenches twist and turn, their narrow corridors often ankle-deep in mud or stagnant water. You imagine the soldiers' boots sloshing through the muck, the constant drip of water from sandbags overhead, and the distant roar of artillery that never quite seems to stop. The air here carries a heavy weight, thick with the musk of sweat, unwashed bodies, and the lingering trace of gunpowder. Occasionally, you spot scratched initials on wooden planks, hearts carved into bark, or small tokens left behind, a makeshift shrine to loved ones far away. These personal marks are whispers of humanity in an otherwise mechanical, brutal landscape. You reflect on how even in the darkest places, people seek connection and meaning. A dry humor flickers in your mind. Trenches are like underground cities, where nobody really wants to live, and the only nightlife is a rat party. You chuckle softly, the sound swallowed by the silence around you. As you navigate further, you notice the ingenious engineering. Duckboards laid down to help feet avoid sinking too deep into the mud, cleverly designed fire steps for quick exits, and sandbags stacked like medieval battlements. Despite the horror, there's a strange beauty in this human attempt to tame chaos. Your footsteps echo softly as you move through the tunnels, the walls seeming to close in, reminding you that for many soldiers, this was both a sanctuary and a prison. You breathe deeply, letting the cool, damp air fill your lungs, grounding you, in this moment suspended between history and memory. You step out from the shadowy confines of the trenches, and into a battlefield forever changed by the roar of new machines, tanks, lumbering iron beasts that crushed barbed wire and shattered the illusion of static war. You feel the ground tremble faintly beneath your feet, a distant growl echoing across the scarred landscape. These armored giants marked the beginning of mechanized warfare, an uneasy answer to the stalemate that had gripped both sides for years. Here's a scientific fact to steady your thoughts. The first tanks were powered by internal combustion engines, similar to early automobiles, converting fuel into mechanical motion, a remarkable leap in engineering that forever altered battlefield dynamics. These early models were slow and clunky, often prone to mechanical failure, but their psychological impact was profound. Imagine the surprise of infantry soldiers seeing these metallic beasts emerge through the smoke and mud. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some tank crews adopted the habit of naming their machines with grandiose titles like Mother or Fury, even decorating them with playful symbols or cartoons to lighten the grim atmosphere. It was as if these steel behemoths had personalities, and the crews clung to that humanizing touch amidst the chaos. Scientists still argue whether this kind of personification helped maintain morale, or was just an ironic distraction. The tanks were imperfect weapons, frequently stuck in trenches or immobilized by rough terrain, but they hinted at the future of warfare: speed, protection, and firepower combined. You can almost smell the oily smoke and hear the clanking tracks as the tanks roared into no man's land, terrifying friend and foe alike. Walking alongside the broken wreckage of one such tank, you notice the intricate tangle of gears and pistons exposed beneath the armored plates, a reminder of the delicate engineering beneath the brute force. The interior must have been a claustrophobic furnace, filled with the heat, noise, and fumes that tested the endurance of even the toughest crews. You catch yourself imagining the faces inside, soldiers squeezed into the tiny compartments, clutching controls with shaking hands, surrounded by the roar and rattle. And yet, they were pioneers on the front lines of a mechanized revolution, driving these monstrous machines into the heart of danger. A light chuckle escapes you as you picture a tank stuck in mud, its crew frantically pushing and swearing, while nearby soldiers watch, offering unsolicited advice. Even in war, some things remain timelessly human. The battlefield's eerie silence briefly returns as you move on, but you carry with you the memory of those early tanks, symbols of hope, terror, and the relentless march of technology that reshaped how wars were fought. You find yourself drifting toward the eerie quiet of a no-man's land at dusk, the air tinged with the faint scent of scorched earth and fading gunpowder. Here, the battlefield is a surreal landscape, shell craters filled with murky water, shattered trees standing like skeletal sentinels, and tangled barbed wire sprawled like a metallic jungle. The sun sinks low, casting long shadows that stretch over the desolation, as if the land itself is exhaling after a violent scream. Scientific fact: the muddy craters you see are formed by artillery shells that explode with terrifying force, displacing tons of earth in an instant. The impact creates unstable ground and lethal pockets of shrapnel, making no man's land a deadly maze. Interestingly, the soil's acidity from decayed shells even affected the local vegetation for decades after the war. For a quirky tidbit, some soldiers reported seeing phantom lights or mysterious glows at night, often attributed to bioluminescent fungi, or even the infamous will-o'-the-wisp phenomenon, ghostly lights that dance just beyond reach. Scientists still argue whether these sightings were purely natural or fueled by stress and fatigue in the war's surreal environment. As you wander the shattered terrain, the silence is punctuated only by the distant drip of water and the occasional rustle of a lonely crow. The broken wire and debris crunch underfoot as you imagine the countless patrols and night raids that crossed this forsaken stretch, each step a gamble with death. The weight of unseen danger hangs thick here, a constant, invisible presence. You recall tales of soldiers using rat traps, crude devices made from shell casings and wire to protect themselves from the ever-present vermin that thrived in these wastelands. Rats were so numerous they became almost mythic foes, stealing food, gnawing on wounds, and even nibbling on the fallen. A touch of dark humor sneaks in. No Man's Land was less a battlefield and more a rat-themed escape room with barbed wire puzzles. Good luck if you ever got stuck in that game. The fading light pulls you toward the horizon, where the silhouettes of ruined villages and distant artillery flashes flicker faintly. This desolation is a graveyard for dreams and a canvas for resilience, where every scar tells a story of survival against impossible odds. You breathe deeply, tasting the cold, damp air, and let your mind rest amid the stillness of a world forever changed by the thunderous echoes of war. As the quiet of the battlefield settles around you, you feel the weight of history gently easing off your shoulders. The mud, the wire, the echoes of distant artillery, they all begin to fade like whispers on the wind. You're no longer standing amid the chaos, but drifting softly above it, carried on a slow, calming breeze. Let your thoughts unwind like the slow unfolding of dawn, the colors softening, the sharp edges smoothing out. Imagine the gentle rustle of leaves in a peaceful forest, the distant song of a bird waking up to a new day. The harsh clangs and shouts retreat into a quiet hum, like the comforting buzz of a fan, steady and soothing. Remember, this journey through the shadowed trenches and broken fields was never about reliving pain. It was about understanding resilience, the fragile hope that flickers even in the darkest nights. The world moved on, and so will you, carried by the steady rhythm of your own breath, as calm and persistent as the tides. Now, close your eyes, and feel the gentle embrace of rest, like a soft blanket wrapping around you, pulling you into a serene slumber. The stories you've heard tonight will settle into your dreams, mingling with the quiet peace you deserve. Thank you for walking this path with me. May your sleep be deep, and your dreams be kind. When you wake, may you carry a bit of that quiet strength with you. End of script. Sweet dreams.